Islamophobia, the fear of Islam, is not a new concept but has increased tremendously over the past few years. How has Islamophobia affected Muslims in America today? And what is our community doing to combat anti-Muslim rhetoric? I'm Brenda Kamal. This is Our Issues, Twin Cities.
You could tell they were not happy to see anybody who was wearing a hijab or anybody who was speaking any other language other than English. So it was a hate crime.
For Asma, it was a casual night out with family last October. But when another diner heard Asma and her family not speaking English, the casual night out turned violent.
And we were sitting down, they were giving us these dirty looks. Then the husband says, we were speaking in Swahili, so the husband says, speak English if you're in America. We ignored him because his tone wasn't that bad. But then the wife started saying, go home or speak English, like really loudly with so much, you understand that so I turned around and I was like, we can speak English, obviously, we just don't want to speak it when we're with family. It's freedom of speech. So I turn around again and she continues like yelling and saying, go home. So I turn around again and I'm like, but I'm home. And she goes, no, you're not. I'm like, yeah, this is my home. Minnesota is my home. And then she goes, and then I ask her, why are you racist? And she goes, because of people like you.
After continuously being harassed for speaking their native language of Swahili, the woman smashed a beer mug across Asma's face, resulting in 17 stitches for deep cuts on her nose, eyelid, and lip. Do you think you were attacked for visibly being Muslim and speaking another language?
Yes, because of the looks they were giving us. This is my home. I don't view America as, this is my home, this is where I got my second chance. So this is my home, and I want to protect my home. I'm not going to go destroy my home. And when people don't look at me and then think, oh my God, she's a Muslim and I want to hit her with a bottle, that's really wrong, because you don't know my story, you don't know my backstory. Obviously, she could have said hi to me and I would have said hi back. She would have understood that I do speak English, but she chose just to be ignorant.
You've lived here for 15 years in the U.S. Have you always feared being Muslim in this country?
Not even one time, not even after 9/11.
Following the tragic attacks of 9/11, many Muslims across the U.S. were harassed, attacked, and vandalized, triggering Islamophobia across the nation.
To me personally, anti-Muslims and Islam is anti-American.
Imam and psychologist Dr. Hamdi has been addressing the effects of Islamophobia for years. How has Islamophobia affected Muslims in America?
The negative impact upon Muslims in general in the United States of America is really, really tremendous. Once that tragedy took place, you'll find, of course, a lot of rhetoric around it and a lot of hateful speech and so on and so forth. But it wasn't as bad as we have seen it today.
Anti-Muslim hate crimes are 5 times more common today than post 9/11. Since the recent wake of attacks in Paris claimed by the so-called Islamic State, the San Bernardino, California shooting, and anti-Muslim comments by politicians, Islamophobia, and backlash against Muslims in America has never been worse.
I can't think of another religious community in post 9/11 America that has that kind of scrutiny, placed upon them.
Todd Green, Associate Professor of Religion at Luther College, is the author of Fear of Islam. Why do you think that hate crimes are more common today than after 9/11?
The kind of scrutiny that has taken place since 9/11 has really been driven by terrorism and Al-Qaeda and now by ISIS. And hate crimes almost always spike after terrorist events. So the Muslim at home becomes a stand-in or symbolic stand-in for Muslim terrorists abroad or Muslim terrorist organizations, or even domestic lone wolf terrorists who commit horrible acts. Other Muslims then are objects of suspicion, if not hostility, and if people who are angry and they want to retaliate and they want to respond, and there's a Muslim close to them or someone they perceive to be Muslim, that's how hate crimes sort of spike. And we've seen that after terrorist events, and we've also seen that with the heated political rhetoric in the presidential campaign.
We're seeing increasing levels of Islamophobia and anti-Muslim rhetoric. How dangerous is Islamophobia and religious discrimination?
It is extremely dangerous. On one, it would lead to the division of the community, and we would love to keep the unity of the community. It would create that hatred and animosity among people. We do not want to see this. It would actually, instead of sticking to the values, wonderful values of this country, we're creating the opposite of the values of this country.
Lives or livelihoods are at stake, right? This affects the people who live in the United States, who are citizens, who are residents, who contribute to the common good and to our nation. But when you're talking about physical assaults on women who wear the hijab, when you're talking about, again, vandalism of mosques, desecration of mosques.
The problem is when you do not know anything about Muslims and you watch what goes on TV, and then all of a sudden you sit down and you think we're all terrorists. That's not good. You have to differentiate that there's people who, like me, love this country. I don't care. I don't care if anybody was to fight America. I would protect it, like seriously, because this is my home, and we all know that everybody protects their home.
Following Asma's hate crime, life has never been the same. How has it changed your life?
I'm not comfortable going out by myself. I had to breathe and talk to myself to come here, to be entirely honest. I don't go out anywhere by myself anymore. I don't trust people like I used to. I used to be an open and friendly person. I used to say hi to everybody. I don't do that anymore. I'm like cautious of people. If I see anybody looking at me like more than they're supposed to, I think they recognize me from the TV and they're gonna retaliate for some. I know it sounds crazy, but that's my reality.
When we return, countering Islamophobia in our community. As the second largest religion, there are over 1.5 billion Muslims across the world. And although Muslims only make up less than 1% of the U.S. population, they have been here since the birth of this nation.
If you look at the word Islam, it's coming from the root silm or salama or peace. So Islam is the religion of peace. Islam will never be the religion of hatred, of animosity, of killing or torturing or terrorizing people. Not at all.
Why do you think people fear Islam so much today?
Despite the long-standing presence of Muslims in the United States, it's particularly in the post-World War II era, and then also even more so after 9/11, that we've seen much more tension toward Muslims in the United States arise. Some of that's political. The United States, since the end of the Second World War, has had a vested interest in Middle Eastern countries for energy resources, among other things. And to the extent that some Muslim countries or some Muslim organizations are perceived to be obstacles to our ambitions there, then they become the enemy, and then Muslims here at home become the stand-in symbolic enemies.
Muslims have always been here, but the reality is now the Muslim population is increasing in America. And so there's more attention to that. Secondly, I think in the world today we see conflicts in Muslim majority countries. And so therefore most of the conversation about Islam is not even coming from their neighbors, it's coming from thousands of miles away where there's actually a war going on and complex long history battles that create the narrative for the Muslim community in America. And so it stems from that, but also stems from really racism. I mean, that's at the heart of this, racism and religious intolerance.
As the executive director of CARE, Jailani's main mission is to counter Islamophobia and monitor hate crimes against Muslims. What are you guys doing at CARE to educate the public on Islam and denote Islamophobia?
We try to educate as much as possible. We hold forums and workshops, and we're going to be doing a lot more this year, knowing that there's a great deal of anti-Muslim rhetoric that's building in many of our communities, and especially actually in rural Minnesota, where we see a lot of fear and a lot of negative views on Muslims.
There's a fairly large community of Muslims in Minnesota, mainly Arabs and North and East Africans, many residing in the Twin Cities. Organizations such as CARE work to combat stereotypes and protect Muslims from hate crimes.
One of the things we are really successful on is collaborating, working with others. And so there's a group today that is working on an anti-Muslim, anti-Islamophobia campaign that will be launched on February the 20th. We have several events lined up. We had recently an Islamophobia conference, the first of its kind, where we brought together leaders from our communities and also people from other faiths groups to talk about what's been happening in Minnesota. And so we are looking forward to continue doing those strategies, encouraging others and partners to do more, but on our part also to hold more events, to provide more education, and also to talk about it, just like I'm speaking to you today, and to have people who are watching this program know that there's organizations out there that they can reach out to.
2/3 of Americans do not personally know a Muslim. Most Muslims they know are through the television, leading to the major stereotype that all Muslims are terrorists.
Are Muslims expected to be the loudest voices in publicly protesting Islamic extremism?
Absolutely. I mean, every single incident that takes place, we often share, we run to share our condemnations of these horrific attacks wherever they happen. And we've been saying that since September 11th. And one of the interesting things is that after each incident, and we made a statement, people still say, you know, where are the Muslims? Why aren't they condemning? And the reality is when, you know, someone who comes from another faith does some act where he believes that it's religious duty, just like the gentleman who shot up an abortion clinic. No one called on the religious groups that he came from to apologize. So they didn't have a Monday morning press conference to condemn, and no one. So there is a double standard toward the Muslim community, as if they are much different and their faith is tied to everybody, is connected. You know, people practice on a spectrum, and people abuse religion throughout history, and we should not allow for those individuals to represent the faith, as in this case, many people are asked to. These bad people are seen to be representing a faith of nearly 1 of every 5 people on the earth.
It's more of communication. We have for people the wonderful, great statement in order to support us, be in solidarity with us Muslim. If we haven't developed that relationship as Muslim with people around us, Christians and Jews and others, in order to help as much as we can, we'll be left alone. And we cannot, to be honest with you, we cannot do it by our own selves.
What more can the Muslim community do to raise awareness towards the dangers of Islamophobia?
Sharing their stories. I know there's a lot of Muslims that dismiss some of the bigotry and racism that happens on a day-to-day basis. Some very silent and subtle, some very loud and clear. And I think sharing that stories with other Minnesotans will, I think, enlighten many Minnesotans to act and to be a strong voice against religious discrimination.
We need to talk. I mean, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm not going to change. I'm only one person. I'm not going to change anything. That's why I go to the news outlet just so that I can tell people this is what's going on. We can hide it as much as we want to. Islamophobia is there. Hate crimes are going to be committed against any Muslim. It doesn't matter where you are now. It could be, I was in a restaurant, a safe place, a family safe place with my nieces, and it happened to me. So it's gonna happen. We have to talk about it. We have to be the people that go out there and say, you know, I'm a Muslim, but I'm not a terrorist. And you have to be able to differentiate between people who you think can attack this country and the people who can stand up for this country. And I think it's our job because nobody else is doing it.
Up next on Our Issues Twin Cities, the effects media has had on Islamophobia. Over the years, media has played a huge role in the portrayal of Muslims in America. Since 9/11, not only did coverage on Islam dramatically increase, but research shows that the negative coverage on Muslims received more media attention than positive coverage.
It has its negative impact, no doubt about it. And of course, the media is the windows for millions and millions of people.
How has the image of Muslims in U.S. media inflamed Islamophobia?
The only story that seems to be worth telling is the story of violence and terrorism. And that's mostly what people see in the United States is, when it comes to Islam and the story being told. They're not hearing these stories from Muslims themselves. They're not visiting the local mosque or the Islamic center. They're not taking courses at the high school or the college, in most cases, on Islam. Most of what they know is coming from the media, and the media's framing of Islam is deeply troubling.
Has media coverage become more or less positive since post 9/11?
On the whole, I would say it's probably become more negative, but it depends on the news cycle. In slow news cycle, months, weeks, months, or whatever, sometimes most of the stories you will hear tend to be quite negative and focus mostly on terrorism. Also, when you have domestic terrorist attacks, you have that sort of narrative perpetuated again. But when there is a backlash against Muslims and it becomes visible, and I think again of the Norway massacre with Anders Breivik or the Chapel Hill murders a year ago, you do see journalists push back and challenge and counter that narrative a bit more. And so I would say right now, just if I were to say the past 2 weeks or so, or even the past month, I would say media coverage has been much more balanced. Okay. Than it has been in the course of, say, the past 15 years. At the very least, one of the things I'm hearing now that a year ago I was not hearing is the word Islamophobia. I could not get a journalist to say the word Islamophobia 12 months ago, hardly at least. But today you can see the word on CNN, on NPR, on MSNBC. Journalists are more and more willing to do stories on Islamophobia and anti-Muslim bigotry, taking this seriously.
I'm Muslim, but I'm not forced to wear a headscarf.
I'm Muslim, but I don't wear the hijab.
I'm Muslim, but I'm not dangerous.
Today, social media has become a new and effective avenue in countering Islamophobia. Muslims across the world have launched campaigns through social media to denote anti-Muslim rhetoric.
Social media is really important because it gives everyone basically an equal ground to say what they want.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
Following hopeful presidential candidate Donald Trump's comments to ban all Muslims from entering the U.S., University of Minnesota president of the Muslim Student Association, Mahmoud, started the hashtag Trump the Stereotype with his fellow members.
How did that idea come about?
During one of our board meetings, we decided, hey, we should do something about all this rhetoric that Trump and, people like him are just spewing out there. And so someone suggested, why don't we do a hashtag? We've seen other campaigns in the past that were super successful. So we said, hey, why don't we do something like that? And so we're actually having our meeting in this room, actually on these couches. And someone who wasn't even on the board, like a general body member, came, hey, why don't you guys do Trump the Stereotypes? We're thinking of hashtags, and he mentioned that, that's the perfect hashtag, And so it started with us, just the board, and then we asked our friends to do it, and then other people started doing it. And overseas, actually, people in London were tweeting about it, and it was really amazing. And we got the university to, a few university departments to actually share our posts on Facebook, so it was awesome.
So then how important is social media in combating Islamophobia?
Social media is huge mostly because of one reason, and that's because anyone can say whatever they want. It's not like a news interview. It's not like a TV program where the producers can actually edit what they want the viewers to see. Everyone's free to say. Everyone has an equal platform, and you can just say whatever you want. So, that's one huge, factor. It's a fair ground pretty much to say what you want.
In Sydney, Australia, back in 2014, there was a terrorist incident in a cafe in Sydney, and in the days and weeks that followed, there were many Muslims in Sydney who were worried about taking public transportation for fear that people might retaliate and target them. And so this organic campaign emerged with a hashtag, I'll ride with you. Yes. And non-Muslims would tweet or text and say, if you're a Muslim and say you wear the hijab and you're worried about taking the bus alone, text me, tweet at me, let me know. I'll meet you, I'll ride with you. And that's a perfect example of combating Islamophobia, doing so in a way that was very specific to what was happening in Sydney at that time. And in a way that was very powerful and sent this powerful message.
Muslim communities throughout the U.S. have not only used social media to tackle Islamophobia, but hold forums and conferences to educate the public on Islam.
How important is the education of Islam in order to denote Islamophobia in America?
Extremely important, and that's why in our congregation in here at the Islamic Community Center of Minnesota, Masjid al-Iman, Mosque of Faith, we open our doors for any groups coming from schools, from colleges, from universities, from churches, synagogues, you name it, to come and observe our Friday congregation and sermon, to come and see us firsthand, not to hear about us or to read about us. We open the floor for their questions to answer it. Any of those misunderstanding or misconceptions about Islam and Muslim, we are trying ourselves to share the truth with people, not always to listen to those misconceptions and misunderstanding about Islam.
What more can young American Muslims like yourself do to denote Islamophobia and educate the public on Islam?
The biggest thing I would do is, first of all, get to know your religion more. You can't tell people what Islam is if you don't know what Islam is yourself. Sure. Be a good person yourself. Yeah. You know, smile when you see people, you know, get to know your neighbors, you know, paint a good image of Islam through your actions.
How do we move beyond the stereotypes and improve the way we speak about Islam?
Stereotypes are so much easier to sort of live by and embrace and invest in when Muslims are caricatures, and they're caricatures in movies and on television and news. Personal relationships, in my opinion, always break down prejudice and help to deconstruct it, and they insert this human face and this human life into the equation that wasn't there before. Once we forge deeper relationships, the non-Muslim majority in the United States will also be in a better position to learn more about Islam, and learn so in a way that's not Islamophobic. Not going on Islamophobic websites or reading some horrible books that sort of, you know, cast Islam in the worst light, but they will want to learn Islam as it is understood and experienced by those who actually practice it.
Thank you for joining me this week on Our Issues Twin Cities. I'm Rana Kamal. See you next time.